like story, book and movie. about
Amy,
that.
can you hear us okay?
Oh,
How's that?
yes.
Yes, I can.
Great.
Live now? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
You're live.
It's supposed to be like. Okay, turning. Check. The monitor. You're up in here. I touched nothing. Nothing. Feels good. Think so. That's it.
I'm Mongo. They announced that that was officially no longer their motto at one point. And it's like, no.
Okay, well.
So just do some. or leave it. Hello. It's shame to be inside. It's like this outside.
Yeah.
Okay.
Even when you just turn this by itself. It's like.
Yep.
Yeah.
Nancy may or may
I'll
not.
say there's kind of a. Yeah. Or maybe some fewer
Oh,
days within.
910 days.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Still, it's a weird late neighbor, you're like going on this Friday, on
Right,
this Friday.
yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Maybe that was.
And I'll.
Yeah. Part of my, I took that way. Or. So good.
Yeah. Oh, ignore the background. More about me today than.
Like his earring bag got ripped out.
It was a Galaxy Move like or something. That's funny.
Well, I know, right?
Thank you, that made me smile.
As a kid, I would just as a kid, standing in front of that.
Are we gonna start? Okay.
Yeah, probably.
Okay. I don't know. Yeah. Calls will set up. I think we're on.
Grab some more sticky notes real fast.
While Jules is doing that, yeah, very similar agenda to what you had sent Christina, just a couple different things, so. We're hoping to just up front kind of talk about the coast session and just hash that out.
Yep.
Do the TA on Article 14 if everything looks good. And then we have just say like a lot of presentations, so we're gonna kind of just go down and probably not go so in depth on each one, but just like the gist of the changes, just for time's sake. And then after that, we wanted to share on 16 for salary. Sarah's got a presentation that I can pull up on the screen, and also
Should I email? Is it okay for us?
do you guys want an email of it? Or do
It
you want-
was, yeah, anything that, any article that you're gonna.
Yes, it's a little slide.
Okay.
For
Yeah,
background.
Okay. yeah. And then discussions on insurance and term of agreement. And then we figured since we're all here, you guys can present your counter, since we're all just talking, and probably just break a long caucus time.
There are two additional items, because there was a request to work out the logistics of scheduling Rebecca and Alex.
At the end, yes, we were gonna thank you for a
So I
minute.
just- we also wanted to talk about just like where we're at in our schedule of bargaining sessions. And just, we have an idea for late May of potentially, making it a longer session, so I want to talk about that a little bit. So yes, we're good with Article 14, it's ready. The person that can sign for it just walked in the door, so. And then, we will have, so we have the RFI data ready.
Okay.
And since it's attached to Article 1, we thought we would share that at the same time. So, whatever order we want to do all that in, we want to do coast discussion first. That makes
Yeah,
sense.
let's do that. We can just figure out. Pearl's kind of our head person on that.
I mean, I sent the details over, so that's kind of what I have. I guess we can start the discussion there.
So our one question we had is, because the way the email read a little bit was like, this is decided that that's the date and what we're doing. And we were just a little concerned because it's a change in date. And for about half of our team, that like to switch it to a Friday is actually not gonna work for us. So we would be like totally open if we could stick to the Thursday. Because we have that on our schedules that way, we'd be more than willing to come out to the coast and do that. But to switch it to a Friday like that changed the game a little bit for us scheduling wise. And so that we'd be missing some key members of our team, and it's because we're a pretty small team, like to be able to make decisions that night, it wouldn't be able, like, we wouldn't be able to TA or do anything like that, so. That's kind of where. Sort of other things that I was.
So as I understand it, we've signed for the building for that particular day. We can try to reach out and see if another time would work. But I think what would be helpful for our team is like, if this is the only availability that this building has, it would be great to get like a a scenario of like what that would look like for your team. So like knowing, you know, there can't be an expectation, you know, for a TA, of course, if a board member can't make it, if that makes sense. But yeah, just kind of like a breakdown of like what that would look like for your team, I think would be helpful, to kind of see if it makes sense, like, well, this still kind of meets what we were looking for, or we're kind of missing the boat on this, let's regroup and make sure it's gonna work better.
Obviously, you're not gonna be able to get a hold of anybody tonight, so we'll just let you reach out tomorrow and let us know. I mean, we're meeting again next week, so we can just bring it up again
Sure.
next week. And look at that.
Any other things related to that building, that space that we want to share, or any other questions beyond that?
I plan on meeting with them on Tuesday that week too, because I'm gonna be out there anyway. So I'll just go and then get a look at like, what does the tech look like and stuff like that, so I can pass that on to Tim. Sounds good, so.
Cause we will have at least one member of our team attending via Zoom as well.
Yeah.
So that will be an option.
Yeah, it threw us because we've been pretty collaborative around scheduling things, and it was like, so we weren't sure if it was like a done deal, which it sounds like it's a semi-done deal. But like for us, it just, that wasn't gonna work for our schedule, and so we were gonna pitch back, can we do Thursday? And keep it still in the Thursday round, keep it the same week.
And then I guess, yeah, Article 14.
Since we're talking about scheduling, so we want to pitch, so we are. I'm gonna count in my head here, so heading into May next week, folks. We have 3 sessions scheduled in May and then 2 in June. And we want to be able to just preemptively say, if we, you know, if we're getting to the point where we're like kind of feeling a little crunched, and we also feel like we're maybe gonna be able to wrap this up by the end of June, we were gonna throw out there that the May 29th to potentially do an all-day session, and I say all day by like starting at 10 in the morning, since our day goes till 8. And potentially do an all-day on the 29th. We looked at the June, but that's the week, like that just, I know what it's like out in districts. I'm like, now let's pitch it back to that 3rd one in May. So just throwing it out there as an idea that if we,
And all day on a Thursday, is that what you're saying?
yeah, on the 29th, May 29th.
I would have to talk to my supervisor.
It's like, right, the logistics of that.
Yeah. That's why we wanted to bring it up as just a potential possibility, say like, you know, we know that like, as we get further into this, we might wanna like really get into some things, and get some things done and agreed on, and maybe having a full day to do that would help us, so. Just an idea. So that's our pitch for another idea besides the coast thing too. Anything else? Guys? Okay,
Article 14.
Article 14, clericals only, so. One on our side for potential signatures, one for me. I'll send them electronic version of that, sure, it's pretty straight up.
Okay.
So the only thing was on line 2, the ESD, it should be LVO. And then on line 8, we've changed the name of my position, and so just making sure that is indicated in here, so it's Executive Director of Human Resources.
I hate to back up.
Yep.
I had to let Rebecca in.
Yep.
And I had one thing, we're glad you're here. The last date in June, have we talked about that yet?
It's,
Cause I know that our team has multiple members who probably won't be able to make it to that.
So that's the 26th or something.
Yes,
oh,
it's.
we had already taken that one off.
Okay.
Yes, so it's we have 2 in June, like the first 2 weeks, basically of June, so the last, I think it's the 12th. Will be our last
Okay.
for this round, so that's why we were saying. Maybe when it's doing all day.
Yeah, okay, cool.
And then this is it for 14, if anybody. Go on 14, let me know, and I'll have Jen sign his over here, and then we'll swap pieces of paper.
Yeah, we're ready to TA with
Right.
these changes.
Very cool. You guys will swap papers. Right. We have Article 1 with the RFI we could present, or if you want to do your presentations, I mean, either way, I wanted to get it to you before the caucus.
Yeah, definitely. I think. If it's okay, we'll probably just share all of ours, if that's all right. And just because we've talked about it and kind of have the order in line, and then obviously before we leave, yeah, here's the proposal, something.
And when I do those, I'll send 2 emails that have electronic versions of them.
Okay.
I've got the RFI is electronic completely, but I have a paper copy of it.
Okay. Sweet. So, morning. Oh, she's.
Yes.
Do you want me to have it on screen, or are you just gonna go off to your phone to?
Actually, I have a hard copy now.
Oh, good, okay.
We will have hard copies for you as soon as all these get sorted out. But we'll start, so, Article 9 is, professional development. And, we are proposing one change in particular. There is, a lot of variation within programs in terms of what's available to pay for professional developments. And so we're proposing that LBL allocate $15,000 to professional development fund that's available on a first come, first served basis to employees who desire to participate in a workshop or course. And that would be available to employees regardless of which department they're assigned to. There is the caveat that an employee must have been employed by LBL for a minimum of 1 year. So somebody in their first year would not be eligible. And they will only be eligible for 1 reimbursement per contract cycle. So in a 2-year contract cycle, an employee could only get 1 reimbursement.
Can I clarify? So you're talking employees contracts.
This contract cycle that we're working on right now, yes.
So I thought we did 3 years.
Well, we haven't talked about that
Yeah,
yet, I guess, so
that
I
will-
suppose I was just making, So that's everything on that one. We didn't make any changes or recommendations other than replacing one word with another word, in another paragraph. We, instead of saying make reasonable efforts, we changed that to demonstrate reasonable efforts. We just felt that that was, something that can be more easily evaluated, demonstrating versus making. So that's Article 9. Article 10, is the grievance procedure. The actual, basic grievance procedure, we haven't touched, so, the process itself. Where we did make, recommendations for changes is within, it used to be called employee and association. We've changed it to right to representation, because it's basically what it's referring to. And just clarified that, an agreement has the right to representation from their association at every step of the process. And also that the association may attend grievance hearings even if not representing the grievant. Particularly if there is, an issue or a situation that's kind of occurring consistently or, within a particular area or amongst members, and there's a need for representation from the association. There's another, and then there's some additional items that have been added on. One is right to information. That a bill is required to provide any information the association needs to process a grievance. And then the last thing that's been added is, collective bargaining agreement training. And that is a dedicated plan, once the contract has been ratified, to have a 60-minute joint training. It doesn't have to be in person, it could be virtual, for particular representatives of the ESD and particular representatives of the association, to make sure that everyone has the opportunity to view the contract together, ask any questions or clarifications, and have the opportunity to learn about changes that have been made, to the contract or things that, they need to be aware of. And that is that. Which I just. So.
All right, I've got the next one, Article 11, which, in our present contract is staff evaluation, but, we are recommending, in addition to the title, which is staff evaluation and plans of assistance. One of the first changes here is we have, found some language from a peer district, that we found was like, particularly like illuminating of like what the process of, staff evaluation serves for both the employer and the employee. And that's things like fostering an increased competence and growth of the employee, clarifying job descriptions and expectations of accomplishment, and enhancing collaboration. There's kind of like some minor changes to language, but the first kind of major change that we've made here is our team has kind of discussed it and recognized that we don't really see or hear that peer assistance plans are really being utilized and present. And so our feeling is perhaps it doesn't make sense to have in the language of the contract if it's not something that we are actively using. So that's part of our proposal. And then in keeping with kind of like the change of title, we have in addition regarding like the process for a program of assistance, just to kind of help establish kind of some guidelines that folks can expect when those plans are used. Now, Article 11.
Then I will talk about the next three. So Article 12, discipline of employees. mostly adding a section in there that's just stating that investigations are to be conducted by the employer. And if it's an outside person, that's with permission of the member or directed by the state. And then also adding in some language about bargaining unit employees having a 1-year probationary period at the ESD. And that would be at the time of hire, or if they've been previously employed as a contract teacher. And then at the end of that article, we added a statement about criticism or reprimand of employees, basically that those just are made in private. So that's all for 12. For 13, complaint procedure, not a ton of changes here, just an add-on to the section where we're talking about complaints that administrators choose not to discuss with the employee. So just some language around that. That's really the only change. And then I think one small strike through at the bottom of a couple words. And then personnel files, we don't have any changes there. We just signed them. That's right. And then the big one, Article 15, which was previously layoff and recall. So no hiring, transfer, layoff and recall. So a title change there. And the big section that we added in was a section on transfers. So specifically talking about requests for transfers and just a process of how that would go. And then also a process for involuntary transfers, like if an assignment changes mid-year, what that looks like. And those are both fairly long. And there's also a third section in there about classroom moves. So if a licensed member is asked to move to another classroom, just what would happen and how much time they get to make that transition. And beyond that, the rest is pretty much just changes of the numbers of the headings. So it actually lines up. And that should be it for that one. And then those are all of the ones that were in the email. So do we want to maybe hear the two from management and then share a little more in depth on salary and insurance? What does the team feel about that?
This is the longer, if we want to break it up. Give y'all a chance to talk.
Sweet.
Will we get electronic versions of all those?
Yes.
I am going to pop into my email real quick and send. So I'm sending you an electronic copy of 14, just so you have it, even though we TA'd it, and then there is Article 1, our counter to Article 1, so that's the first email you're gonna get. The second one is the response to the RFI, and that is just electronic. All right, so, if we unhighlighted something, it was language that we were like, yep, that works for us as well. I did put there were two things that were in our original. I don't know, I feel like we've gone back and forth on this one a couple times. So on one of our previous ones, we had added the statement on line 8 and 9. And then it wasn't there on the one you guys sent back to us, and we just wanted to reiterate it, that statement's necessary for this to be a legal, this came from our attorney. Because the OTAs, PTAs, and SLPAs are not exempt employees. And so in order to continue to have them as part of it, like, we just need this statement in here to clarify that. And then we'd also noticed that the 200-day line was not included on this one. I think it just got skipped or something because it's on Article 6, it shows it there, so I was just bringing that back to our attention. So those are the two just from the front page that, bringing back up. So then, second page, so again, kind of coming back to the temporary staff, and we did provide the RFI, and I'm gonna talk through a little bit of the data that's in that RFI. We also did some clarification around defining what we mean here by substitute teachers and what we mean by temporary employees. Because your RFI was actually really useful for us as well, to just be like, well, what do TPEs look like? You know, what are we using TPEs for? And so it helped us to go back and actually kind of clarify the language there to say, this is actually how we're using TPEs. So in the data that you were given, we were able to pretty much give you all of the columns of information that you had wanted. There's some notes at the bottom, so you're gonna need some time to kind of digest it all. But right now we have total of 13 TPEs. Those are 13 people, but it does not equate to 13 FTE. That's the unique thing about TPEs, is that many of these TPEs are less than 0.4 FTE, and some of them are even less than that, because they're on a contract where it's an hourly kind of contract. And the way a TPE works on our end is we have to put a max amount of hours in there. And so we provided that information for the contract staff, but it didn't make sense for these 0 FTE TPEs, because it was like, well, at this point, like, I'll give, the first row gives a really good example. That person has actually only worked 37 hours for us this whole year. So we added that column where it says through hours to date through April, just as a reference of like, you know, the 1.0 TPE that's in here has actually worked full-time, and you can see that. But all the rest of these are some sort of partial employee, sometimes a long-term sub. Some of them there's some limited duration funding because they're grant, or they are, like, there was a really unique example here where the Oregon Charter School needs an SLP, but they only want to pay by the hour. And so it's a really, like, again, kind of like how we're using TPEs, they almost wanted a TPE from us. So that was a unique contract for them. So it just kind of shows like how our TPEs are, for the most part, are not 1.0s. They're actually quite a bit less than that. So we just thought providing the hours to date that they've actually worked this year would be helpful when you kind of review that. And then the second grouping that we have here is our contract house folks, and we have 16 of those on this list, primarily SLPs or SLPAs. That's the grand majority, followed up closely by our OTs. That's the other area where we have to use a lot of contract house. Wanted to just kind of share, we highlighted in blue the dollar. So you know, you did ask like, what's their hourly rate? This is not their hourly rate. It's what we pay the contract house. So I actually don't know how much these people make an hour, but this just kind of gives you an idea of the cost for us to have to pay the contract house for that. And then what I thought would also be kind of interesting to point out is the very last, you can scroll all the way over to column P, where it talks about fund. This gives you an idea of where these TPEs and contract houses are actually coming funding wise. And if you'll notice, the grand majority of these are what I would consider limited duration funds. They're either grant funds directly, or they're tier 2 funds, which anybody who's been in BSD long enough knows that tier 2 commitments from districts are an annual event for us. And for better or worse, I was a program director and went through that anxiety every spring, like, oh, are they going to contract for the same amount? Are we going to be able to keep people? So sometimes districts make decisions too late in the process, and so a TPE is the only route that we can go. Because we also aren't always convinced that the district is gonna maintain that level of service for multiple years. If we get to the point where like, you know, and I think I gave the example of our FSLs at one point, were in that boat. And then we had districts that continue to commit and do, and say, you know, we're gonna have an FSL again next year and again next year, and so those staff got moved into contract positions. So that is the data that then kind of defines the language that we put on this, to clarify. So it really comes down to two categories. Substitute teachers, and what we mean, yes, we agree with you that, because we do have substitute teachers. But then we also have what we call subs that are covering for staff for a variety of reasons. And then we clarified what we meant by the temporary employees themselves, that it's around that limited duration of funding, that it's experimental or a pilot service, and then four, that they're working less than 0.4 FTE. And those are all those small ones that you see on the list. Any questions about the language or the data? If we need caucus, you just let us know and we'll answer those. So. We are not ready for 6.
Okay,
We might be if we kind of, we're gonna see where you guys are at, if we wanted to do like maybe a 45-minute caucus and come back, we might be ready at that point to come forward with more of some information around 6.
okay. And I think it might help that conversation too, after we share about salary and insurance.
Yeah.
So do we want to do that now and then break? Okay. Did you get one?
So to go along with salary, we kind of put together a little slideshow just outlining our reasoning behind the things we're proposing here. With the largest change being kind of in line with your things you mentioned last time. So speech language pathologist education is equivalent to that of school psychologists. And therefore the salary scales for both professions should reflect this. So our proposal is moving the SLPs to the same scale as the school settings. And then while this presentation focuses on the SLP area, our members have also expressed that audiologists and school nurses share kind of the similar issues, so they could also be put on that scale. Audiologists are licensed under the same organization as speech pathologists, so it would make sense to kind of do that change. Here's a bit of our background. Sorry for the bulk on this one slide, but and I think a lot of this mirrors what we talked about last time. SLPs are a difficult to hire position. We have not hired a direct SLP since 2023, despite significant attempts to do so. And that's the Cs department. I should add, a lot of this comes from the Cs. I think Cs is kind of the one struggling most right now. It's common that any potential SLP hires we have will decline the job offers after getting compensations. It's just not competitive with other districts or ESDs and isn't really meeting the industry standard for the field. We're currently filling those empty slots with contract house SLPs, which isn't ideal for the company or for our clients. We play an integral role in filling direct service roles. There's a few things listed here. We do a role on all autism and CLD evaluations performed in the center. We serve populations that could be considered high incidence within our school communities. And we know that our AAC specialists have high caseloads and there's no current caseload caps either. So those gaps in coverage are also often filled by utilizing SLPAs who need to be supervised by an SLP anyway. And those are also often hired through contract houses to fill those gaps, again, particularly in the Cs department. We know that districts are also having to rely on virtual SLPs, which also come with a variety of challenges. And we know that that need is not expected to go down, but it's probably going to increase despite the staffing shortages. So the education equivalency, just to elaborate a bit more, we know that school sites were placed on their separate pay scale last bargaining session to reflect more accurate compensation for their degree. And the SLP's education credit hours and clinical practice hours are equivalent to the sites. Just as an aside, we know that not all sites that come into the company will have that degree either, but they are all being put on that scale. And then all speech pathologists are gonna have the same education to perform their job duties at the ESD. Here's just an example. This data is obtained from a couple of the local schools that offer these programs. The degrees are equivalent, so the same-ish, very close number of semester hours and supervised hours. With the school site's third year internship being equivalent to the SLP's clinical fellowship, it requires those 1,200 or more hours of supervised practice. The scope of practice for SLPs is quite wide. Here's a list of all the things we do. Lots of language articulation, things that you're gonna find in all of the schools that we serve. Scope of practice is wide. The workload as well, we just wanted to bring some attention to the workload of speech pathologists. Again, a couple of these things do apply to C's department SLPs only. We do the in-center evaluations, integral part of many of those teams. We provide direct services in the district, so speech language therapy involves lots of additional workloads of scheduling, coordinating school staff, lesson planning. A lot of districts don't provide administrative staff to do that for the SLP, so we're the ones that are in charge of calling parents, coordinating all those meetings and all of that admin stuff. Case manager responsibilities as part of performing under an IEP, we often have to act as case manager for those students, which is another huge amount of work to put on our caseload, our workload. In scheduling meetings, drafting and maintaining the documentation and meeting all those legal requirements from the IEPs. And then supervision, so we supervise those SLPAs and we need that certificate of clinical competency to do that.
Grad students too.
Yeah, and grad student. Contract SLPs are expensive, so we fill those empty positions with the contract X employees, which has been the case for years. For example, in the East Department, there's currently 5 direct hire SLPs and 5 contract house SLPs. And we know that a lot of those contract employees have been with us for numerous consecutive years. It's not ideal for the company, it's expensive, it's not ideal for our clients, there are high turnover rates, there are gaps in care, patchy coverage. It's not good for the kids to have a different SLP come in, give their care every few weeks. And raising the SLP salary to match that of school sites, in addition to being just equitable, is going to be more cost effective than continuing to pay contract taxes. So we did this mock-up of first column being what the C's SLPs are currently being provided. Or I should say what you pay to the contract houses. Middle column is the direct hire SLP's current salaries. And the last column is if you were to hire 5, which is a long shot, that probably would never happen. SLPs at the current FTE of the contracts with the same experience as our direct hires. That's the amount, 129,612 is the difference that would be saved by moving SLPs to that scale and not hiring contract SLPs instead. So as a summary, SLPs are a hard to fill position. We don't want that high turnover, patchy coverage. I don't think any of us want that to continue. We have a wide scope of practice and skills, with high workload. The education is equivalent to that of some of our colleagues, such as the school sites who have moved to that separate pay scale. And we just think it's a more equitable place for SLPs to be and would improve odds of retention and recruitment. So that is our quick, I'm gonna do that really fast. but-
Just to back up one slide. So your projected costs on there, this is salary only, there's no
Yes,
benefits.
just that only. Right. Yeah, and then there's just a quick slide at the end saying that I already said that audiologists and nurses would also be better reflected again by that scale. So given that information and our proposal to put SLPs on the same scale as the sites, when we send you the digital copies of the proposal, the COLA that we're proposing is taking that switch into consideration. So for the base scale, that would include, that's what's going to include teachers, OTs, sorry, teachers on one scale, and then OTs, PTs, we know are on their own. It would be a 8% in the first year and a 5% in the second year. And then for the psychs and the SLPs and the audiologists who are now on that other scale, it would be 5% in the first year and 3% in the second year. And that's an attempt to sort of balance that gap that's existing there now. The other salary related thing you're gonna see is that when SLPAs were moved over onto their scale last bargaining, it wasn't ensured that that was an industry standard salary. So we wanted to look at some comparative scales to make sure that they're going to be comparable to other districts. And then the last thing I'm gonna touch on is mileage. So this kind of got brought up before. Mileage was mentioned in one of the other articles, and it's also mentioned a bit more at the end of this one. This is a real quick rundown. We did a survey of our members to see the kinds of issues they've been having with mileage. And these are the major things. So members are reporting that details for mileage, I mean, were not clear during the hiring process. A lot of people seem to say they were told they would be reimbursed for mileage and didn't know that there was the home base rule that would change whether or not they were able to claim all those miles. And the license agreement is online publicly, so they couldn't have looked at that and seen that there's this home base rule that changes how they claim. So there's been inconsistent guidance as well on how to determine a home base, regardless of whether it comes down to variation in supervisor interpretation of the rules, it has resulted in inequities for our members. A lot of the time, whereas the contract stands, it seems to be that the location where 50% of your time or more is spent is how we determine that home base right now. But we know that that rule has not been used the same way across departments. And we even have members that didn't travel to a place more than that 50% of the time and were told that their home base would be somewhere else other than the ESD building, which just wasn't consistent in that rule, how it was being used. There's also a specific inequity between job categories. So some jobs within the ESD are almost never going to have their home base changed to anywhere other than, we say the Albany site on here, but it could also be the coast, if that's where their sign could be that as well. So some specific jobs within the ESD are required to serve in a district for more than 2 days a week, often from year to year, whether you're moved around from different districts or not. And therefore, wherever you are, that becomes your commute, and the distance is significantly larger than the commute to the ESD building, then they don't get to claim that. And yes, since it changes from year to year, it's impossible for an employee to like change their home. No, it's just, it seems like the ESD building being the home base would make more sense for most employees. This is just an example. We know that school psychologists are rarely, if ever, placed more than 2 days in one district. So all mileage outside the commute miles to this building are going to be reimbursed to them. And then other jobs such as SLPs, family support liaisons, were another one that were hit hard by this, are often assigned to work more than 2 days in a district. They're then told to change their home base to that location, and that commute / travel time does not get reimbursed. I threw a couple of examples on here. I probably won't go through them right now, but it's just showing the difference between and how it would add up. So for example, this person, it ends up being about $30 a week that they're not getting, which doesn't sound like much per week, but it's gonna add up over a school year in addition to, you know, wear and tear on vehicles. Here's another example, same thing, someone traveling to and from a different place other than the ESD building, and how that works out for them. They are losing 35 per week once you minus out the commute. This person was one of the individuals who worked 50% or more and then did not, yet they did not change their home base. So the bottom left side shows if they had calculated their commute using the ESD building as they should have, what they would have been reimbursed, versus the erroneous not changing their site, how much. So it's a $60 difference per week for that person. And then these are direct testimonials from our members that we can just leave them up here. You guys can read them at your convenience, but we thought it was important to share specific feelings from our members on how this has affected them throughout this process. Last slides are all testimonials.
We can just share it.
Or, yeah, we can send it out.
Wanted to touch on, there were some. In there originally is the bilingual stipend, and, it was unclear how that's being utilized to benefit. Members, employees, so we made some suggestions to that to change it to be. And you can read through that, but just to reflect. The benefit that that brings to the DSD, to the families and districts that we serve for people who speak or sign in different languages. And then also to reflect the specialization in we have a lot of specialists in this building. Teachers of visually impaired can obtain an orientation and mobility certificate, and we wanted to recognize that specialty for the stipend.
And, kind of for what we've done so far. It's not, they're not stapled, so you have to kind of go through them, but they're each kind of. So.
And just apologies from me on some of the copy stuff. We're adjusting to our new office and we have all of our supply stuff, including the staple boxes, like warehouses attached. It's a whole thing. So we just say thank you for your patience with some of our being in transition with our home office. But we'll get you the electronic versions tonight too.
And I think there's 6 copies. We do have more if you need more. I think I just sent across enough to go around the table, but there are people that are.
That's why the electronic would be helpful, so we can get it for the 10.
Should I move forward with Article 17, insurance? Have we seen all these testimonies?
I think we've been to 3. If you don't have any, Sarah.
I'm gonna email it, so. We'll be here.
I will present insurance. So the first thing that we are looking at here is increasing the employer contribution to be more equivalent to some other nearby districts. We are looking at 1,700 for the 25-26 payroll cycle and 1,750 for the 26-27 cycle. And then obviously there are going to be changes, like we're taking out the 23, 24, 25, 24, 25, because those are no longer relevant. And then that has also kind of been reflected in other numbers that are impacted by rising costs of healthcare. So things like the numbers in the health savings account section will be different to reflect that change as well. And then another thing that we are looking to add that would also provide some options that are available to other nearby districts would be an opt-out option for those that do not take their insurance, but provide proof of their insurance through another source. This is just a recognition that there are a fair amount of members that are not taking insurance, and the price tag to the ESD is well, it's a lot less than their coworkers, and sometimes there are reasons like, so I am insured through my spouse, but she works for local government. And in our present time, every other day can be that death knell of, well, I'm not sure if my program is going to be along much longer, and who knows what that means for insurance. So by having something like this in place, an opt-out option, I think that would be a way for the ESD to recognize that just because someone is covered through a family member doesn't necessarily mean that like they don't need that help at some point. So being able to squirrel away things that maybe they're not needed at that moment, but maybe when that spouse loses their job or has to transition somewhere else, those funds can help pay for, you know, emergency medical care and those sorts of things that happen. So this would be another option for members. We are looking at a percentage of that 1,700 that we're proposing, and that percentage would be 65%. Which, so for example, for that first year, that opt-out would be 1,105 per month. That is. We had some sections here that we removed that were talking about and someone may need to correct me here. But I think this was the 9-month schedule. It was a schedule that we didn't see being used anymore. So
It was removed out of contract.
Yeah.
Some contract to go. However, there was some language that was still within the insurance section that was referring to a 9-month payroll.
thanks, Marty. Appreciate that. And then another thing here is like section H. And section G, we're in reference to like a committee, an advisory insurance committee, and that's something that we're not recalling or seeing is in place. So it doesn't sound like it's a bad idea.
It does exist. I don't know who currently is sitting on it, and it
Okay.
only comes up every time we bargain.
Okay, and it may not necessarily
So it's not
match the language in the contract as to who those members are and like what their tasks are. So then H also is talking about a report that is presented to that committee, but also to the association president. So those sorts of things maybe aren't happening quite as they're in the contract. So maybe we need to collaborate more, figure out what is working, what isn't working, and change some language there. I believe that is insurance. And then the last one I have is 18, which is term of agreement. And it's probably already obvious from some of the things that we've proposed already, but we think it would make most sense for the term of this contract to be the biennium. We think that sets up for probably for the best conversations during bargaining. The most solid numbers, they're never solid, but you know, probably a better bargaining process than the 3 year. So that would be July 1st, 2025 until June 30th, 2027.
And I am, we were just going to review the appendices. And we kind of just wanted this particular part to be sort of interactive because we just wanted to check and see what you guys were thinking about the appendices and which ones were relevant and which ones weren't. The first one has to do with the targeted sign-on stipend. And so our first question is that being utilized at this point in time?
Yes.
Okay. So I guess the next question would be, is there a place within the contract that information should be added versus keeping it as a memorandum of understanding, which typically is added on during a contract period? So we might need to do some thinking about
Yeah.
that, like maybe in the hiring, transferring the fourth part.
Yeah, that's pretty about it. Because usually what it is annually, we determine which positions qualify for that stipend.
Right.
And it's passed on to the association president if there's any changes from the previous year. And I know this because I just learned about it this week. So-
Perhaps it goes at the end of hiring, which we just, or salary, which we just reviewed. Because there is a section at the end, which is where the targeted stipends got written before.
Yeah.
So that would make sense to actually add it as a section in salary. Okay, so, we'll leave it to you guys to stick that in there when you do your counter proposal. Appendix C is the MOU regarding the review of caseload. That is over. We've accomplished and completed the work that was outlined in that. So we basically just crossed the whole thing off, but that would just be, we weren't necessarily gonna give you a copy of it all crossed off. And then Appendix D, the memorandum of understanding hiring of PERS retirees is also integrated in, hopefully, into that hiring section. So that would just be, looking through that section and making sure that there isn't anything in the MOU that's not within the language of the section. And then, and then the other appendices are just some like one-line changes that were made. So those would also go away because they were only relevant to, particular sections of the previous contract. Okay, so it sounds like the only one that we are keeping is Appendix B, and that information is gonna get rolled into, a part of the current or the contract that we're working on now.
And then I have a question, it's okay, around appendices with the salary schedules. So they, for this year, are listed like C1, C2, C3, is that correct? That's what I'm seeing on the hard copy, but then they were before, like the year before, like A1, A2, A3. Is there some context for like the A versus the C, other than just the year? Because what we are going to send to you, we just labeled them A1, A2, A3, etc.
I have no idea. How they
Okay.
work.
So if the letter thing is throwing any of us off, we could just like adjust that, but that will be something you'll see formatted in our electronic.
Unless, were they all part of an appendix A? And an appendix C at some point? That's
It's
the only
hard to
thing I
tell from
think.
the standalone, but
Yeah.
yeah, so we could. We have it referred to in the body of our text and then as A, so whatever. it needs to
Yeah,
be.
A, B, and C are the separate years within the agreement.
That's why, okay, I got you, okay, so that's why it was ABC, so we're gonna just. We'll, make it clear how that would be re-upped then for these.
Great person got this.
So we're at 6:30. 19. It's 7,
I think it's 7:15.
7:15.
10:15.
Yeah.
Okay.
They
Are you sad you can't?
Today, no, normal, yes.
Really handsome.
Freaking.
Share at 7:30, I do have to step out.
Our TA.
Yeah,
Article 9,
which is
professional development.
professional development. Yeah, any,
We'll take,
questions or
we'll
discussion?
take it as it is. Okay, so I'll have Jim do this one and bring that one over to you. Article 11. There's one line that we would want back in it, but everything else we would agree to. So I do have paper copies of it if you would like it, or you can just look at it in your thing.
I would like a paper copy.
Yes.
Yeah, maybe great.
Okay. And they're colored, so the one highlighted line that we would like to remain is yellow. So. I don't know if I did enough copies of hustling to get this here.
Yeah.
Page number on this one, I'm sorry. I think it's on the. So we're good with everything, we just would want that line back in. You had crossed it out from the original language. And if you want to caucus on that, we understand that, but that's, otherwise we would be ready to PA that one.
Can I ask for to assist us, just some of the context or your thought about requesting us to waive that right and or anticipated like small or larger changes to the evaluation program that you would see happening, just more, just I guess, yeah, helping us think through it a little more.
Well, I mean, I feel like if you look at 8, it clearly defines a process for which we would go about doing any changes to the evaluation. And we don't see that as something that we would come back and bargain about because we've got a collaborative process for it.
So you're not necessarily talking about bargaining about it in the same way we're doing right now, and that we're considering it a bargaining, you're talking about like an MOU sort of thing. Is that what you're referring to?
I think that if we were to try to, like, if we wanted to make changes to the evaluation handbook, that you would want to bargain that versus using the process that's already here. Where it's a collaborative, like we have a group that gets together to make those changes.
I think my follow-up question is. In 8, it says whereby LBL requests association involvement. To me, I read that as. You could decide not to request our involvement. Which would cut us out of the process without recourse on our end.
So can we reword that language where it's more of a collaborative way to, because
Like it's a given that. Language that's more definitive about.
about that, you could request it, we could, like, it's a collaboration, like if there's gonna. Cause it could be on your end of things that, you know, be looking at the evaluation handbook and saying, you know, this just doesn't apply anymore, or something has changed. And, you know, we have the relationship with the labor management team where things like that do come forward. And so I feel like we have a process to where, so if we need to change it, that it's not just us requesting it, but like it's a mutually. Well, like, I'm really looking for a collaboration, yeah. But I'm at a loss for language.
Yeah, yeah, I think we need some time to caucus
Yeah.
and anticipate coming with kind of language to reflect
Yeah.
what you're talking
Yeah.
about.
Yes. I would agree that it does right now sound like it's just us requesting it. That's not how I see it in operation. Um, It could be as simple as something like LBL and the association collaborate in the development of, so just change the beginning of that, for example.
If you guys get a chance to look over if you had questions about or.
I think we would want to have some discussion about Article 6. Just wanted to check in to see if you had any to bring back to us for any TAs on your end at this point.
We looked over one on the. I was in the bathroom. I'll let you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's a couple more things that we want to look at for Article 1, so. not-
We need more time to review the RFI data
Okay.
and when we had a chance to do that, then we can get back to you on that.
So then, Rocco, if you take the lead on.
Yeah, so we wanted to go through and respond to your Article 6 requests. So what we want to do is just kind of walk through our thoughts. We do have some additional questions and comments on there. And then we want to get some roundabout figures of what we'd be talking about, cost impact wise these would be. So I think probably the best way to do is just to go through letter by letter of what's in there, and we're going to start with letter H. The items preceding H on there aren't of the same magnitude, so just for expedience sake here, starting on H. So this will be classroom staffing requirements as it pertains to the ECSE classrooms. And I'm actually going to ask Autumn to walk us through what we're seeing here first.
Can you make it any larger?
And I want to just make sure introductions, if you don't like say who you are, because not everybody here maybe knows you.
Hi, I'm Autumn William, the director of the early intervention.
And I apologize, before you start, I'm just gonna excuse myself because I'm meeting with another bargaining team over Zoom and I'll be back, but thank you.
Yep.
Thanks. Related to staff ratios, so on the left side, everything under that large white span, so columns A through E, all of our ECSE classrooms are staffed with an ECSE specialist and 2 instructional assistants, and then other licensed staff who are providing services to children in the kiddos, for the kiddos in the classroom, SLP, staff hard of hearing specialists. They will pop in and out. So when everyone is there on the day, when all of our staff are there, we do sometimes have staff absences and that causes some changes in that. But these are the numbers of children in each of the classrooms, at each of our sites. So Clover Ridge, most classrooms run 3 classes a day. So this is the number of kids in each of the classrooms. On the far, we scroll back up there to a little bit. On the left side is our language and articulation classes. So that has 1 SLP and then either an SLPA with them or an instructional assistant. So only 2 staff members in those classrooms. So the numbers of kids we do as we're placing children in classrooms, try to weigh impact, like if there's some very large impact kids in a classroom, we might try and place them in another classroom. So we do our best to try and weigh that, but we only have so many classroom teachers in each building. And different teachers are equipped with different skill sets to handle different kids or different backgrounds in their tool belt of their experience working with specific disabilities. So there's our Clover Ridge site, and then we go down, and our next one is our Crawfordsville site. So we have fewer classrooms out there. We don't have any speech and articulation classrooms running out there right now. Our Dixie classroom. So most of our classrooms range from 6 to 9 kids, a few a little bit lower, nothing over 9 in any of our sites at the current moment.
Okay, so to look at what we have for classroom staffing requirements, the request is essentially that for 8 to 12 students on there, we have no classrooms above 12, so we don't need to sort of consider that on there. We go from 2 IAs to 3 IAs. So in the EIECSE program, as we looked at that, that is going to create about 8 to 9 additional IAs that would be required to cover, because we have to be able to do that site by site. So those IAs come in at a total cost of $550,000. Similarly, we would have 3 IAs that would have to be added to long-term care and treatment under your second request, and they're going to come in at about $200,000. So we've got about $750,000 there. And next we want to take a look at item I, which is the caseload limits. And I'm going to ask Nancy to bring us up to speed on this.
So for this one, and I'm sure you all can agree, 1 does not equal 1 when we're working with kids, right? And so getting a more specific description of what you mean by caseload is what we would need to be able to cost out this part of it. Because there's just, again, 1 does not equal 1, right? Our behavior consultants have a different caseload than the family support liaisons. Because, and speaking of, they're not on this list, and so we might want to add them to it. But, you know, some family support liaisons have easier caseloads than others, so maybe they have more kids, or they try, you know, whatever the reason, but 1 doesn't equal 1, and this is what's really stymieing us in trying to figure out how this will affect the finances.
We would need a really clear definition as to what's the line of demarcation where suddenly this student, based off of the activity you've done, is included in caseload or not. Does a single touch count going into caseload? Is it a touch per week? Is it a something? We really would need this well defined in order to be able to execute what is in here.
Is this the kid that you actually are the one who does the paperwork for and creating the meetings for? So there's just so much into this. And one of the things from our work group, 75% of our employees were okay with their caseload. So that's, but again, I don't know that we had a great definition, honestly, to move forward with this one. So we're kind of stuck on this one for that.
Can I ask a follow-up on that?
Yeah, sure.
I've seen some caseload calculators use kind of weighted percentages. I mean, is that the kind of thing that you'd be interested in seeing, like perhaps for an SLP, like a kid that I case manage is worth a heavier weight, right? Because that involves more paperwork and things like that, versus a kid that I serve but I don't case manage, that's a slightly lower percentage, and the way that changes how it's calculated out. Is that kind of what you're interested in seeing?
I think that's necessary, but probably not sufficient. right, we would really need a bright line definition, right? If this is gonna be part of compensation in the contract, we need a method where without dispute, we know this counts as one for caseload, right? So we would have to know what is the definition for OTs of this is when a student counts as being included in this OT's caseload versus they subbed for somebody for a week, right? We would really need to know something where we could go down and it would be without dispute, because otherwise we're gonna be in the territory of so-and-so thinks that they have, 72 students on their caseload, and the way that we're looking at it, we think you have 58. And without language that would define what it actually is, we are unable to resolve it.
Right, makes sense.
Okay. So we're gonna hold off on any cost impacts of that. However, one thing that we would just have to bring in, that if we are going to have to track caseloads for each one of our licensed staff and be able to go through, calculate, reconcile contracts into payroll, it is going to be administrative cost to us. So we are gonna have to reserve $200,000 to add into our HR department to be able to handle tracking these and doing any payments that are due on that. For J, I think we have a similar set of concerns here.
Well, for Jay, on this one, I know, and I can speak to long-term care treatment, we have a case manager who doesn't teach any classes, so really her job is so she's got more than, she had 32 IEPs that she has been tracking, but that is her only job. It's not like she's a classroom teacher who then also has to do paperwork. So she doesn't really fall into, I think, the intent of this. I'm not gonna speak to your intent. I don't wanna say that, but she's got days. Every day is a day for her to do this. And so I don't know how she fits into this. And I know Autumn, the way you have your schedule.
Well, part of it's kind of defining like what a caseload means.
Yeah.
Because when I look at, like, when I pull EC Web, I've also pulled in like regional staff that might see a kid quarterly. Or, so figuring out caseload to determine how many other service days. So if we had a clear definition of caseload, it'd be easier to define this same article to make sure that we're able to.
So I just have a question. So when we say non-service days, does that person also then provide service? The person you're talking about that all they do is the IEPs,
When she doesn't have paperwork to do, she
She
does go
provides
out and goes to classes and
direct
checks in.
service.
She checks
That,
it.
that like is her direct service, though. I'm not talking about consult. I'm talking about like, she's providing direct service.
I would have to ask her.
Well, from tax them. Yeah, minutes that she's legally obligated to. make,
Right.
For example, is what
Yes.
we're thinking when we say direct service.
Okay, yeah.
So that's why I think that, non-service days, if you don't have any service days, then. Yeah, it wouldn't really apply to you.
Yeah. And then Autumn, even the classes.
Where I was gonna say, we don't. We've tried to set up our schedule to build some of this in the IECSC on Fridays, so some staff that have larger caseloads, or if they're doing home visits, they may schedule things on Fridays. Classroom teachers, we've tried to build some of this into scheduling already, so as we're navigating this, we take that into account as well.
So for the current time on here, again, like with we're gonna kind of reserve putting an actual cost on J, because I don't think we have clear enough definitions to be able to put an honest figure on it. Moving on to K, service provider time. So this is 1 day per month, free of all duties. So we're gonna do just kind of a quick back of the envelope on this one, so you can understand where the magnitude is coming from. So if we take roughly 160 licensed staff across the ESD, and that's 10 days per staff member per year, that is 1,600 staff days that we have to backfill in order to get to the current student service levels that we are running at the ESD. That is 9 new staff that have to be added on in order to accommodate this. It is probably more than 9 because we have to look at this program by program. And we're never going to be able to say like, hey, we're gonna add a 0.3 to this program because we'll never fill a 0.3 for a program. But just for back of the envelope, best we could do management wise on there, that's 9 staff members, and that's about $1.25 million.
So you're talking about services continuing to be provided on that day and having to hire substitutes for the people that would be.
It's not subbing,
Having to
we
stay.
would, it would basically, it would be almost like a long-term,
Permanent sub.
thank you, permanent sub. We would need more labor just entire on there because we couldn't go to our districts and say, we're decreasing everything that we're doing for you on there. We're not able to get to as many kids as you have, right? We have to cover the services that we're currently covering for them. And if we're moving, this is a substantial amount of student interaction time that we would remove, we would have to replace it with something. So looking at what the request is, best case scenario, that's about 9 positions, which is $1.25 million. Moving on to M. So there's really 2 places at the ESD that M would have the impact on, and that would be EIECSE and long-term care and treatment. It's not really so much of an issue in Seas and Cascade Regional. We're not even quite sure how we would think about this for FSLs or behavior consultants. So we're just we're gonna reserve FSLs and behavior consultants, but just sticking with the areas where we could just easily put a number on it. Again, what this is going to do to us is we would need a permanent sub in place in each site in order to cover. So that if we at a moment's notice on there had somebody who says, I need 2 hours out, we have to be able to put somebody in that classroom with the kids immediately. So that is 4 new staff members at EIECSE and 1 new staff member at long-term care and treatment. So that's about $550,000 at EIECSE. It's another $135,000 at long-term care and treatment.
Again, like the number, it's the total cost, not just salary, right?
Right.
It's really important to remember.
Right, so we gotta pay benefits, we gotta pay healthcare costs as well, employer taxes. So when
So-
we,
Hold on.
Yep.
Before we do that.
Mhm.
So we did have a question, kind of like our own RFIDU, just informally of like, could we get some examples of actual things that have happened this year that would kind of trigger this need for a staff member, just so that we would kind of have some idea of the different examples that you think would fit into this category that have happened this year.
okay, so then for the items that we're able to readily get a cost on that we just went through, so that does not include anything that would involve the caseloads for still a great many number of people that are in the organizations, right? The SLPs, the OTs, the PTs, autism consultants, all of those on there, that's left out. As well as anything that would happen with the IEPs, that is $2.9 million of additional cost at the ESD. And for context, licensed salaries at the ESD are just north of 11 million. So this is a giant impact and request that is in here. So what we are going to ask for on Article 6, we don't think this is doable. In fact, when we look at that $2.9 million, there's a very heavy concentration in EIECSE, so much so that essentially it would shut the grant down. There would be no way we could add that amount of labor in, because the only solution to adding that labor in would be to cut labor out. The cycle just couldn't occur. So it would essentially cause the grant to shut down. And it's similar impacts elsewhere at the ESB as well. I'm not sure there is any program that could actually sustain the amount that this would cost again. So our proposal here, we do want to move into Article 16. We think that is the biggest issue that is on the table. We do want to acknowledge again that through the employee survey, 75% of respondents thought that their workload was doable and reasonable. And this does not seem, this $2.9 million does not seem like it lines up with that, or could be placed at the ESD. So our proposal would be to pull Article 6 back to original language, where we would be removing the items that we just discussed. We still are agreeable to talking in terms of requests on mileage. We were working on some stuff in the background on that. But we would need the rest of Article 6 to remain as is before we could move on to talking economics.
I know we're like kind of close to 8, so maybe we can, finish things that we're doing together.
Yeah.
And then all in an evening. What else did we have that we wanted to?
Scheduling. Yes, we do want to make sure that there's time scheduled for Rebecca, Alex Howe, and at least one other member of our team to work with you, Bill, and look at that costing tool.
Yep.
Rocco would be the point of contact for that, because what he's gonna do is he's gonna see what your availability is, and then he has access to all of our calendars, because we're gonna have at least one of us join him as well. But we'll just see whoever that, based on what dates you guys pick, it'll be one of us will join as well with that, so.
And then did want to address, we talked about Article 1, but Article 7 and 8, we will be working on a counter bill, so through the next session.
I anticipate, so we TA 9.
Yes.
Kicked 11 back to you, 12. And then is it 13 and 15? Those are the other 3. There's just some logistical things around that legality wise that we just want to be able to review with our attorney. But when we looked at them during caucus, there's quite a bit of it that we're like, okay, we could work with that. So I anticipate us coming back with some counters on that next week.
18 term of agreement, is that?
I think that's gonna be part of.
Yeah, I
by
think,
next week.
yeah, I think we're gonna have to talk about term.
Is that, I mean, I see how it's absolutely connected to things like salary and
Yeah.
insurance.
Yeah.
I think perhaps one of the important parts for both of our teams, right, is to have that objective of, are we looking at 3 years? Are we looking at 2 years? So obviously no need to address that necessarily tonight, but I think that would be probably helpful,
To come back with.
even if it's not something we teach.
Yeah.
And then we're also gonna work on a small counter for 11, right, just for that section.
I did send an email with the electronic version and I dropped in the email the potential language that would make it more collaborative and you can add to, that's our suggestion and then you can come back and whatever you want.
That I'll add that to our list.
And then someone's gonna loop back about the coast of whether Thursday's an option.
Do we want to share more about the ghosts tonight?
Yeah, I mean, so we were kind of lucky to get that day. So, I mean, we understand that, yeah, you know, that had been the kind of accepted calendar invite, but that we had kind of talked previously that we were gonna have to move it to like later in May and we have to move it for, you know, to another day perhaps to fit around schedules. We totally understand that might mean that there's no TAs because there might not be somebody there that can sign, and we're totally fine with that. But that's kind of where it's standing right now.
Yeah. If it's possible to keep the date, have productive discussion and present proposals and counter proposals and. Caucus and do our due diligence for those members on the coast. I think that's really our main interest. So if that's possible, great. we can try to reach out, but like Pearl said, this location. Is busy.
Yes, yeah, and they're great because they have enough space for us,
It's a good
because it's difficult to get through rooms, especially that can fit the right amount of people, so.
Have you had members reach out and say that they would attend in person?
There've been interest in attending for sure.
Yeah, well, I mean, we're gonna have to look back and talk about it, because it really does, when half your team's not available. It kind of puts. It really diminishes the presence. I mean, we're really collaborative on our end too, and yeah, we can keep each other looped in, but we really do want to do this as a team.
And, I mean, I'm one of the ones who can't be there. I will be on the road to Washington that night, so I generally can't be there. And I want to be at these, right? So,
And I think, we've had members that haven't been
Yeah,
able to come,
yeah,
so we
no, I
totally
get it,
get it. Just never, it doesn't work for our schedules. There's ones that I'm not gonna be able to be at. So I think that we totally get that. Some people just are not gonna be there.
If we could suggest or help you find a different location for Thursday, would you be open to that? We've never talking to
We've
somebody.
already signed with this place, so I don't know how we'd have to probably look about what that means for the association.
And then the other piece, regarding what is it, the end of May?
Yes, the 29th.
The potential for like an all day. Really the primary concern for us would be, an understanding of whether the association is covering costs. Or, if, the EST is accommodating them. We don't need that information tonight, but it'd be helpful to have that, and that way we can, find our response and figure out if that will work on this.
I just want to make sure scheduling for that session on the costing model. I understand what the next step is, who's reaching out. And what time frame we're looking to get that into. Things, it is a very tight schedule right now with what I have, so I want to make sure we are on it. Or it's just gonna cascade off.
We were hoping to do that at the table. Once I get, Rebecca back, I will talk with her and see, if we can get an email out to you tonight.
That's what we have.
We're back here next Thursday.